The $50 trillion lie. How the dying Mississippi River will collapse America's food supply. The barges weren't moving. Grain sat sweating in steel holds while a salt line crept upriver like a slow knife. New Orleans ran emergency taste tests on tap water. Here's where things get interesting. The number you've heard, $50 trillion, only makes sense if one assumption holds: the Mississippi never fails. But hold on, radio chatter said draft cut again, and pilots waited for a channel that wasn't there. This isn't a drought story, it's a design story. The lie was stability. Who knew? Why they let it happen? And what breaks first? The question isn't whether the river will fail again. The real question is, who already knows it will, and why are they letting it happen? To see why, we need to go back to the river's one weak point. The lie was simple and profitable. The Mississippi is a self-correcting, endlessly navigable artery. If water falls, dredge. If shoals rise, cut a new bend. If sand clogs, push it aside. The promise baked into farm loans, export contracts, and municipal bonds was that this river would always be open, at predictable depth, on human timelines. That promise held long enough to build entire balance sheets on top of it. Then the river started saying no. Start with the sight nobody forgets. Stacks of barges lashed 3 wide, 5 long, parked mid-channel in late September light. Towboats idling, captains checking the same gauge every hour. When stages drop far enough, their drafts have to be cut. Less weight, more trips, higher costs. Convoys shorten, queues lengthen. At Cairo, Memphis, Vicksburg, Baton Rouge, the math hits like a chain reaction. Hundreds of barges stranded isn't a headline. It's a stoppage in the yachter that feeds the world's grain lungs. Listen to the second sound, the thud of dredge pipes on steel. The emergency callouts always arrive with the same urgency. Mobilize dustpan dredges, shift cutter heads, deepen crossings. The invoices are never small. Routine dredging is a standing line item. Emergency dredging stacks on top. In low water years, the bill swings wildly, tens of millions to chase sand waves that move faster than paperwork. Operators eat surcharges because every extra foot of draft they can't carry steals margin they didn't have. Now the part the shipping maps don't show, the salt wedge, the river's hidden failure mode. Fresh water rides above salt because it's lighter. When the Mississippi runs strong, it shoves the denser Gulf water back. When discharge falls below thresholds, the core watches like a heartbeat. The sea slides in under the river, a creeping tongue along the bottom. Intakes built to sip fresh water suddenly face brine levels their designers assumed the current would always defeat. This isn't just physics, it's policy turned inside out. Meanwhile, the numbers behind the pictures make the stakes personal. This basin feeds a continent. A huge share of U.S. corn and soy rides by barge to the Gulf, where export elevators turn river grain into global meals. Petrochemicals line the lower river, and fertilizer, much of it imported, moves upriver from Gulf ports to Midwest fields. The same artery that sends grain out brings nitrogen in. When the channel constricts, exports stall and plant food for next season doesn't arrive on time. The loop tightens. Think of the river as financialized geography. A soybean on an Iowa truck is already priced as if it will reach a Panamax hold below New Orleans. A barge load of urea priced in the Gulf is already assumed to be spreading across Illinois by spring. Futures markets, basis differentials, and storage hedges all rest on the same premise. The channel is open, drafts are predictable, timing is reliable. Break the premise and the pricing cracks. Elevators widen basis to cover risk. Farmers delay or dump. Shippers slap on low water surcharges that ripple through every contract. The lie hides in 2 comforting words: self-correcting. The Mississippi isn't a self-healing machine. It's an engineered performance that requires constant energy, money, and luck. Locks hold stages on the upper river. Revetments pin banks in place. Cutoffs shorten the distance to speed flow, and with it, sediment delivery patterns. Dredging deepened the lower channel to fit the ships we wanted, not the river we had. Every tweak brought benefits and a maintenance bill that arrives whether rainfall does or not. Evidence of failure piles up across seasons. In low water years, barge drafts are cut foot by foot, taking millions of bushels off the move when they're needed most. Emergency dredging campaigns stretch crews and budgets thin. The salt wedge pushes past familiar river miles, and underwater sills, temporary berms, are built in a race against chloride counts. Intake pipes that once had comfortable safety margins stare at thresholds for corrosion, taste, and health. Cities draft contingency plans for barged freshwater, while towboats wait for the next survey to show a deep enough hump. Look at it from a farmer's cab. Grain bins full, a contract date circled, an elevator basis that shifts with each river bulletin. If the river chokes, storage fills and cash is tied up. If fertilizer moves late, the planting plan shifts, maybe the rotation too. Diesel costs climb, and trucking those extra miles to a rail terminal isn't an option at harvest speed. From a barge pilot's wheelhouse, payroll keeps ticking while the river stage dials inch down. Debt doesn't care that the bend silted in overnight. From a municipal plant manager's desk, chloride tests line up against public advisories you don't want to issue. There's a point where equipment starts to suffer, and a point where people do. Health departments talk in thresholds: sodium for vulnerable populations, chloride for taste and corrosion, bromide as a precursor to treatment byproducts. Those numbers get real when the wedge moves faster than the models. All of this funnels into one conclusion: one river controls exports, inputs, and drinking water for millions. Concentration brought efficiency and world-beating logistics. It also built systemic fragility. The Mississippi was sold as steady because steady underwrote the cheapest food and the highest yields. But the proof is in the stoppages, the surcharges, and the salt. The river's weak point isn't just a bend or a crossing. It's the belief that the river will always correct for us. But numbers don't feel like anything until you meet the people trapped by them. Scale and stakes you can't ignore. To grasp the scale, trace a raindrop from Montana snowfields, Iowa tile drains, and Appalachia's hollows. 2/5 of the continental United States gathers into this basin. It spans more states than most Americans can name from memory and outsizes many European countries combined. Yet the output is concentrated. Counties along the Corn Belt produce staggering shares of the world's corn and soy, and most of that bulk leans on one spine, this river, to reach salt water. While that was happening in the Corn Belt, the river narrowed into human choke points. Between Memphis and Baton Rouge, the channel threads a corridor of bridges, bends, crossings, and industrial docks that run hot even in normal years. Above St. Louis, the navigation promise is a 9-foot channel staged by a gauntlet of locks and dams, a staircase designed in the 1930s for traffic that looks quaint compared to today's volumes. One mechanical failure, one gate out of service, and you don't just delay barges, you stack harvest across states behind a single concrete hinge. Here's where the freight math gets unforgiving. A single 15-barge tow can replace roughly 1,000 semi-trucks and about 2 100-car unit trains. Replace that with rail, you'd need dozens of unit trains, perfectly timed with locomotives, crews, and track slots that are already committed. Now squeeze the river with low water, cut drafts, shorten tows, and the replacement fantasy collapses. You don't reroute hundreds of millions of bushels on a whim. You accept delays, or you eat discounts. Price doesn't wait for polite explanations. When elevators fear they can't load on time, they widen bases to protect themselves. Futures may look steady on a screen, but the local cash price, the number that pays or starves a farm, slides as river bulletins turn red. Storage bins that were a hedge become a holding pen. Interest meters run. And remember the other direction: fertilizer, potash, ammonia, diesel, parts. If barges inch, inputs arrive late or cost more. Planting windows don't care about invoices, they care about soil temps and rain gaps. Miss them, and yield leaves the field before the seed hits dirt. Unknown to them, across town, the port shifts its schedule. Elevators trim hours, a few shifts disappear. That bartender near the wharf loses a night's tips. Service economies ride the river too. Their margins don't show up in commodity charts, but they vanish just as fast when the tow lights vanish from the levee at dusk. Meanwhile, the Memphis, Baton Rouge stretch acts like a customs lane for national output. Here, petrochemical plants, grain elevators, refineries, and tank farms line up in a choreography that depends on predictable drafts and steady stages. If the river gives up a foot, ship loadings change, tug assistance changes, the safety margins at crossings change. Each small adjustment echoes through insurance premiums and contract clauses. One more inch off, the draft is one more legal call about force majeure. And there's a hidden timer running in the fields. Harvest isn't a date, It's a band of days when moisture, weather, equipment, and labor align. Force a farmer to hold past that band and you're paying in shrink, spoilage, and stress. Force them to move early to beat a basis slide, and you're paying in wet grain penalties and drying costs. Either way, the river's stage meter becomes the metronome for towns you'll never see. Now the externalities come home. The same diesel that moves tows runs combines. When low water multiplies trips to move the same tonnage, fuel burn climbs. Surcharges pass through to freight rates. Those pennies per bushel add up when margins are already thin. Fertilizer volatility rides the same artery. If a bulk shipment sits outside the jetties waiting for a deeper tide or a workable window upriver, inland prices twitch. Traders can hedge. Farmers can't hedge April weather with a May delivery. Here's where it gets interesting. This isn't just commerce, it's water you drink. While drafts are cut and queues form, a parallel drama plays out at intake pipes sized for a flow that doesn't always show up anymore. Health thresholds aren't patient. Corrosion doesn't negotiate. A utility manager's best day is routine. The river's low water season makes routine look like luck. The stakes are layered like the river's own currents. Commerce on top, logistics in the middle, physics beneath. One bend silts, one lock jams, one forecast misses, and the cascade begins. And yet the system persists because for decades the average is held. People plan to averages. The river doesn't move on averages, it moves on moments. So when you hear a tidy number attached to America's food supply, remember that number is riding a barge that can't fit under a bridge in low water, past a crossing that needed dredging yesterday, toward a port that can't load full when the draft drops 2 feet. Remember the family pushing a grocery cart a few miles upstream who never asked for a lesson in river hydraulics, but got one from a faucet. Saltwater Wedge, the hidden failure mode. To understand the river's weak point, we need to go below the surface. Fresh water is lighter than salt water. In high flow, the Mississippi's current rides over a thin, backward-moving layer of Gulf water hugging the bottom. In low flow, that thin layer thickens into a wedge, denser, heavier, quietly pushing upstream along the bed, while fresh water still moves seaward above it. From the bank, the river looks normal. Underneath, it's losing the fight. Here's the stakes. Municipal intakes along the lower river sit at fixed elevations, designed for a world where discharge held the line. When the wedge advances, chloride and sodium climb at those screens. Taste is the first alarm, corrosion is the second, health is the third. Treatment plants have limits, and they're not negotiable. This is where a navigation problem becomes a drinking water problem with a timer. What actually happens feels like a scramble. The core models discharge daily and watches chloride at key river miles. When forecasts show the wedge crossing intake thresholds, crews build an underwater berm, an emergency sill of dredged sand across the channel bottom. It's an invisible speed bump for salt. Fresh water flows over, the heavy saline layer slows, stalls, sometimes stops. The sill buys time, not certainty, time. In Plaquemines Parish, that clock has rung more than once. Intake stations have shut down for days as chloride counts exceeded drinking water standards. The parish now knows the logistics of moving water by truck and the uneasy rhythm of boil advisories, taste notices, and temporary pipelines. In 2023, as river discharge sagged and the wedge crept past familiar markers, agencies laid out contingency plans for barging fresh water to treatment plants, literal floating lifelines. Meanwhile, farmers listen for a different number. Crops don't tolerate much salt at all during germination and irrigation. Sodium and chloride burn leaves, stunt growth, and tip soils toward long-term structural damage. Irrigation pumps that pull from back channels and intakes face a hard cutoff, past a few hundred parts per million. You're choosing between saving a crop today and salting your ground for next year. That's not a choice, it's a slow loss. Cost comes fast and slow. Building a sill requires dredges, tugs, survey boats, and around-the-clock work. You're moving hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of sand into precise underwater geometry, then monitoring it as the river tries to erase your effort. The bill lands in weeks. The slower bill lands in steel and concrete, corrosion accelerated in treatment plants, meter by meter of pipe seeing conditions its designers never priced into the life cycle. Insurance won't love those change orders. Here's the part that kept hiding in technical memos, intake elevations and design assumptions. Many plants were built for a statistical river, Historic flows, historic salinity, historic sea levels. They were smart for their time. Sea level is up, the delta is sinking, upstream precipitation timing is shifting. The margin between safe and salty has thinned. What nobody knew at the time, or didn't budget for, was how often that margin would be tested. And then there's river physics, stubborn as ever. An underwater berm reduces salinity intrusion locally, but deepen the channel to fit larger ships, and you change the density flow dynamics that feed the wedge. Cutoffs that sped the river also reset how long fresh water lingers over the denser layer. In engineering speak, you're managing a two-layer flow with tools built for a one-layer river. Health lines draw hard boundaries. Chloride above 250 parts per million starts the taste complaints and raises corrosion risk. Sodium advisories for sensitive populations kick in lower than that. Treatment byproducts can spike when plants adjust processes to handle higher salinity, introducing a second risk while trying to solve the first. Utilities are juggling chemistry on the fly because the river turned variable at the worst time of year. So who pays? In the moment, taxpayers fund the sill, utilities burn contingency budgets, and households buy bottled water. Downstream, industries add their own filtration or pause draws, and agriculture eats yield losses where salinity sneaks into pumps. Upstream of all that, the freight system takes another nick. Barges hauling freshwater to cities aren't moving grain, and dredges nursing a sill aren't clearing shoals. The wedge is a quiet kind of failure. It doesn't flood a town or snap a barge string on camera. It seeps into pipes, budgets, and fields. The river still looks like a river until a faucet says otherwise. Okay, but who pays when the river turns against the people who feed it? Meet Derek, a barge pilot out of Cairo. His wheelhouse smells like coffee and diesel, the radio keeps spitting the same bad news, and the River Stage app is pinned on his phone like a heartbeat. He's been tied off to a fleeting area for 9 days. 15 crew on rotation, payroll bleeding out, loan payments due on the tow he refinanced when fuel spiked. He calls dispatch twice a day, not for updates, there aren't any, but to hear another human confirm the channel's still shallow at the crossing ahead. Get this, actually penciled a side job hauling freshwater, then lost it when the sill went in. He's paying to sit still. 50 miles inland, Kelsey's checking the temperature on her soybeans. Bins full, contracts lined up, river closed. The basis on her phone widened 6 cents in an afternoon. Her lender moved their friendly reminder up a month. She walks the yard with a moisture probe and the familiar ache of decisions she doesn't want. Truck to rail, the nearest unit train slot is already booked, and the line haul quote would eat what little margins left. She could sell wet ahead of forecast rains and pay the drying tariff, or hold and pray the queue downstream clears before the beans pick up heat. The combine is paid for, the note on the land is. Unknown to her across town, Tanya's lining up cases of bottled water next to the couch. 2 kids, 1 grandmother with a sodium-restricted diet, and a kitchen tap that tasted like a penny last night. The advisory said it was safe for most people, but the clinic told her to warn her mother's doctor if taste changes keep coming. She's been to 3 stores because the first 2 sold out by noon. Gas isn't cheap. Neither is missing a shift to sit in a line of cars waiting for a parish distribution drop. Downriver at the port, Lewis checks the whiteboard in the break room. 2 shifts cut this week. He'll make the mortgage if his wife can pick up extra hours at the diner, except the diner's slow because the tow traffic vanished from the levee road. He's proud of running grain spouts and standing on catwalks that hang over ships the size of neighborhoods, but pride doesn't pay when hours vanish with the draft. A buddy texts him a photo of a tug waiting for a deeper tide window. "You good?" he replies. The dots blink, then stop. Here's where the river's math breathes. Derek's idle hours flow into Kelsey's basis slide, into Tanya's grocery bill, into Lewis's missing paycheck. Derek calls his banker and pushes a covenant check-in. The banker asks about utilization and projected days to movement and reminds him the line adjusts if the rating changes again. Kelsey pulls an old spiral notebook and revisits her rotation for next year. Maybe fewer corn acres if ammonia stays high and the river keeps playing games with spring shipments. That choice echoes in soil health for years. Every pivot has a tail. Meanwhile, Tanya's scrolling city posts about intake levels like it's a weather radar. She texts her neighbor a photo of the water she boiled for dinner, clear, but she can't shake the taste. The neighbor sends back a link about underwater sills. None of it mentions her mom's meds. Lewis sits in his truck on his lunch break and runs the numbers on late fees. He thinks about picking up a night shift loading trucks inland. But the overtime that used to bridge gaps is now a rumor. This is the bridge between charts and kitchen tables. It's the way a river that's managed becomes the reason a farmer misses a contract, a pilot misses a note, a kid misses soccer because her mom's in line for water, and a longshoreman misses a payment because the channel dropped 2 feet. The promise of a steady river shows up as steady lives. Break it, and the break is personal. To understand why this keeps happening, we have to go back to how we built the river we wanted, not the river we had. The historical context, engineering the illusion. To understand why Derek's toe sits idle and Tanya's faucet tastes like metal, we need to rewind. A century ago, the lower Mississippi wandered. It braided, cut new paths, and stacked sediment into land that rose as fast as the sea did. Towns flooded, yes, but the river also fed its delta. Then we decided to trade wandering for certainty. First came the straightening. Engineers sliced cut-off channels through long meanders, shortening the river by scores of miles to speed flow and lower flood stages. Revetments, mattresses of rock and concrete, pinned banks in place. The idea was simple: faster water, fewer floods. But faster water carries sediment farther offshore, starving the marshes that once buffered the coast, and crucially, changing how density layers behave near the mouth. We gained predictability for navigation, and paid with a thinner shield against the Gulf. Upstream, the lock and dam era locked in a 9-foot navigation depth. Pools backed up behind concrete steps from St. Paul to just above St. Louis. Barges could count on stage, towns could count on riverfront economies. The cost was fragmentation. Side channels, backwaters, fish, and floodplain ecologies were sliced into compartments. Maintenance became a forever line item. Mitre gates, tainter gates, scour repair, dredging the crossings where the river insists on putting sand back. Many of these structures date to the 1930s and are now well past their design life. Meanwhile, we deepened the lower river to fit the ships we wanted, 45 feet, then a push to 50 to attract new Panamax hulls and make loading more efficient, funded in phases since 2020 with federal and state dollars. The math looked unbeatable: more bushels per ship, fewer voyages, dollars returned many times over the dredging bill. Here's where it gets interesting. The deeper you cut the channel, the more room you give the salt wedge to sit and push. We optimized for draft and accidentally improved the pathway for the Gulf to move upstream when flows fall. Dredging turned into a habit that looks like addiction. Each season of cutting shoals resets the channel for the next season's shoals. It works until the bill spikes when water drops and sand waves migrate faster than crews can. Over decades, the practice felt like control. On paper, it still does. But hold that thought against the emergency sills we're building to tame the very density flow that Deepening helped empower. Farm policy locked the illusion in place. We subsidized yield, scaled up monocultures, and built storage, elevators, and contracts that assumed cheap bulk movement to the Gulf. Rail stayed a backstop, trucks stayed local. Export position from the river became a competitive edge we wore proudly. That edge depends on drafts, stages, and schedules. We made corn and soy flow like water. We forgot water is the first ingredient. There were warnings. The 1988 drought sent barges to the bottom and forced emergency measures. In 1999, the Corps built an underwater sill to slow a rare salt wedge. In 2012, low water pinched again. In 2022 and 2023, the wedge returned and stayed, with 2023's intrusion lasting into early 2024, proof that once a decade was sliding toward could be yearly. Each time, we called it an event. Each event was feedback. What nobody knew at the time, or knew and filed away, was how stacked our trades were. We swapped resilience for speed, redundancy for efficiency, and natural buffers for concrete assurances. We told ourselves the river would behave because we had made it behave for decades. We priced loans, insurance, and municipal bonds on the assumption that tomorrow would look like the average of yesterday. Here's the kicker: none of this was villainy. It was a century of rational decisions, each one solving an immediate problem, each one narrowing the future. Locks created jobs and stability. Cut-offs saved towns, Deepening unlocked export wins, Dredging kept Christmas ships on schedule, farm policy fed the world. But there was a ledger we didn't read carefully, the river's physics and the coast's slow sinking. We engineered a promise, therefore we inherited its bill. The year the river spoke back. It started with a forecast that felt like a typo, discharge dropping week after week, no storm systems upstream big enough to budge the line. Towboat chatter turned clipped. Harbor dispatchers began swapping phrases, normal delay became indefinite. Then the call went out from New Orleans district, build the sill. Chronology matters here. First came falling stages through late summer, sand waves marching across crossings that had been clear in June. Draft advisories tightened in steps, by inches at first, then by feet. A 15-barge tow trimmed to 12, then 9. Captains cut loads, stitched lighter tows, and hoped to time their runs at daybreak when winds set and Seiche sometimes bought a foot. Shoals popped where surveys had been clean a week earlier. Crossings with names you only learn when they fail, Wilkerson, Stack Island, Belmont, went red on screens. Meanwhile, at mile markers that rarely make news, chloride counts ticked upward. The Corps pushed survey boats daily, modeling the density interface sliding upriver along the bed. When the Wedge threatened Plaquemine's parish intakes, crews mobilized dredges and pushboats to pile sand across the bottom, an underwater berm the public would never see. It was built in stages, topped as the Wedge rose, like stacking sandbags underwater. On deck, the crisis looked like paralysis. Tow queues ballooned above problem crossings. Harbor services rationed their time. Insurance emails carried subject lines like low water operations and temporary endorsements. Pilots who'd never seen a sill in person ran routes planned around a structure their AIS barely acknowledged. You could hear the strain in radio calls. Any updated draft reports? Not yet. Hold your position. This was the moment everything changed, because the river forced the market to admit it. Grain that usually flows downhill into Gulf holds met a wall of logistics. Elevators along the lower river curtailed loading. If ships can't top off, you load short and pay for air. Futures screens flickered, but the real chaos lived in basis sheets. Mississippi River bids blew out relative to inland markets. A 10-cent swing in a day isn't unheard of. A 30-cent spread held for a week turns storage into a pressure cooker. Elevators begged for space. Bins filled past comfortable margins. The phones in country offices rang with the same question: should I sell now or wait for water? Insurers and creditors didn't wait. Underwriters flagged low water exposures for tow operators and terminals. Deductibles nudged up. Coverage for groundings got tighter. Bankers called barge companies to touch base, which is code for updating cash flow under constrained utilization. Small fleets with newer debt stacks watched covenants like they watched gauge readings hourly. The federal-state scramble looked coordinated on paper, but on the ground it was patchwork. The Corps ran dredges hard, prioritized critical crossings, and kept topping the sill as the Wedge pressed. State agencies pushed advisories and planned emergency water moves, including temporary pipelines and barged freshwater. Port authorities worked tide windows, adjusted pilotage, and shuffled berths to avoid grounding ships in their own mud. Everyone knew the fixes were tactical. None changed the underlying math. You can't push more water that isn't there. What nobody knew at the time was how quickly the shock would echo globally. A few major buyers, burned by repeated delays, shifted optional origin contracts to Brazil and the Black Sea. Traders called it prudent diversification. For farmers holding grain in Illinois, it looked like a door quietly closing. Future premiums tied to Gulf reliability lost shine. While that was happening in Baton Rouge, across town, utilities ran treatment plants hard and learned the limits of their chemistry. Sodium advisories for vulnerable residents, corrosion control tweaked on the fly, contingency plans for barged freshwater dusted off and costed. Hospitals updated protocols. Schools drafted notices. Water managers refreshed a phrase they don't like to say aloud: we might get through this if the sill holds. Then the weather teased a reprieve, drizzle in the Ohio Valley, a front over the Missouri. Gauges twitched, just enough to move a few toes. The queues thinned a little, phones went quiet for half a day, but the Wedge didn't leave, it paused. The sill stayed in. The lesson held: emergency measures bought time, not stability. In the aftermath, audits landed. Commodity desks reviewed basis management. Ports tallied demurrage and light loading penalties. The Corps published after-action notes, what worked, where models missed, which crossings demand different maintenance rhythms. Insurers adjusted their playbooks. Bankers recalibrated risk for fleets whose earnings now hinged on hydrology as much as fuel. And yet a nagging line threaded through every report. These fixes only work when the river cooperates. Sills slow salt, but deeper channels and subsiding land shrink the margin. Dredges clear crossings, but sand returns with each pulse. Credit cushions shocks, but interest compounds while toes idle. The turning point wasn't just the year a sill went in again. It was the year people stopped calling it an anomaly and started calling it a season. But there was one problem. The season was getting longer. The complications we can't outrun. While everyone caught their breath, the river was already loading the next set of problems. Climate didn't flip a switch, it shifted the timing. Spring storms arrive in bursts, then nothing for weeks. Snow that used to melt like a slow IV now comes as a quick dump, a warm spell, a pulse that races through the system instead of lingering as insurance. The basin's old buffer, mountain snowpack, and steady shoulder-season rains has been shaved down. Discharge looks fine for 10 days, then drops like an elevator. You can schedule dredges, you can't schedule a season that won't sit still. 3 states west, snow telemetry shows thinner packs and earlier melt. That means less cold water in August and September when the Wedge watches for weakness. Farmers upstream feel it as weird springs, mud one week, dust the next. River managers feel it as jagged hydrographs that complicate everything from tow scheduling to bank protection. What used to be a gentle sine wave now looks like teeth, with high evaporative demand driving low flows, even when rainfall totals don't look extreme on paper. Meanwhile, the ground itself is sinking, not headlines, centimeters that matter at the coast. The delta subsides as the river starves it of sediment and global sea level ticks up. The margin of error shrinks. A tide, a stiff south wind, a low river day, and suddenly the Wedge can jump miles. Add a late-season tropical storm brushing the Gulf, and you've got surge pushing on one end while the basin delivers less pushback from the other. The physics doesn't negotiate. Denser water wins when the height difference narrows. Nutrient load adds a twist. Decades of fertilizer wash feed a hypoxic dead zone offshore, but the hidden problem upriver is sediment starvation. The cutoffs and revetments that made navigation smooth also trapped the river in a chute, sending sand past the marshes that once soaked it up like a sponge. The delta's natural sills, mud and reed beds, are thinner, patchier, easier for salt to skirt. Rebuilds take dredges and money. The river needs time and room we've fenced off. Then there's the hardware. Locks and dams built in the 1930s are past their designed life. Mitre gates groan, gears get custom fabricated by shops that keep old patterns in drawers like family heirlooms. Maintenance windows collide with harvest windows. Replace a gate a week early and you avert a failure. Replace it a week late and you strand a fleet. Levees, intake screens, pump stations, everything was sized for a river that fit yesterday's statistics. Corrosion, settlement, fatigue. They don't read memos about budget cycles. Even when the structures hold, the coordination frays. Upstream withdrawals tap aquifers and tributaries for irrigation and cities, each straw small, together notable. In low-flow years, every cubic foot per second held back for a lake level or a field is a cubic foot not pushing back salt. The basin has dozens of decision points, each rational locally, misaligned globally. Water law wasn't written with a density interface in mind. The compacts weigh floods and navigation. The Wedge wasn't in the room. Competing uses play out within sight of each other. A petrochemical plant times intake draws around saline spikes. A port schedules lighterings to make drafts work. A parish asks for a pipeline extension. And upstream, a power utility hedges summer peak with reservoir releases. None of them are villains. All of them add up to stress on a system that's running closer to the edge. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the fields. Equipment finance got tighter as lenders priced river risk. Insurance started asking more questions about supply chain exposures. A seed salesman found himself explaining not just trait packages, but logistics contingency to a farmer who has to decide in November what a river will do next September. These are small conversations that tilt a million acres one way or the other. Here's the part that makes planners sweat. Each complication stacks. Altered precipitation timing reduces late summer flow. Subsidence and sea level shrink the head difference. Nutrient-stressed, sediment-starved marshes stop acting like baffles. Aging structures add downtime right when you need uptime. Withdrawals nibble the cushion, then a storm nicks the mouth. The wedge doesn't need all 5 to show up. 3 can do it. On paper, you can model it. You can draw elegant hydrographs and density profiles. But on the river, it lands as a captain asking, "Do I have 12 feet today or 11? It lands as a public works director deciding whether to pre-stage pallets of bottled water before the press conference. It lands as a farmer booking ammonia in January because March might be a mess at the docks. The complications aren't a list, they're the water we swim in now. We thought the river would soak variability the way it soaks rain. It did, until the buffers we built into the landscape and the system wore thin. Now the same choices that made the river a superhighway, straight, deep, fast, make it brittle under new timing, new baselines, and old steel. While this was unfolding across the basin, the fields started playing by those rules too. Agriculture's feedback loop. Meanwhile, something else was happening in the fields. Planting and harvest used to be windows, now they're keyholes. When river timing gets jagged, the calendar compresses. A farmer stares at a 10-day forecast and a barge bulletin at the same time. If the river looks shaky in April, fertilizer shows up late or expensively. That pushes nitrogen application into warmer, wetter soil where losses climb. You buy yield insurance with dollars and hope. Stakes first, miss the planting window by a week, and you can lose 10 bushels of corn per acre to heat at pollination. Miss the harvest window and a windstorm writes off soybeans onto the ground. That's family income, not a line on a spreadsheet. When the river signals uncertain, decisions jump forward or slip back. Those shifts play out as real yield and real cash. Action looks like this. In January, dealers book urea and ammonia time to roll up the river in March. Low stages force lighter loads or delays, so trucks backfill the missing tons at a higher price if they can even find drivers. A co-op scrambles, split applications instead of one pass, more labor, 2 trips across fields that are barely dry. Fuel runs higher because every fix takes movement. On-farm tanks empty sooner than planned. A rain hits the exact day the second application was supposed to go on. Nitrogen efficiency falls, and with it, yield potential. Impact ripples through the year. The same farmer who ate a $35 per acre fertilizer surprise now sees basis widen because river loading slowed. They're squeezed on both ends. Next season, they remember. They plant more soy to cut nitrogen dependence, or they switch to a shorter season hybrid to sidestep fall gridlock. Shorter season seed can dodge weather, but it often yields less. Soil health plans get traded for cash flow survival. Fewer cover crops, more tillage to dry out a field sooner. That shows up as erosion in the ditch when the next storm hits. Meanwhile, storage becomes a pressure valve with a cost. On-farm bins fix timing, but they trap cash. Interest on an operating line quietly eats the gain from waiting for a better bid. Forced sales happen when lenders call about working capital. You don't haul because price is good, you haul because the note says so. And if the nearest river shuttle can't take grain because barges aren't loading, you head to a rail loader that's already booked, paying diesel and time. A day you should be harvesting becomes a day in a line. Fertilizer logistics are their own treadmill. Ammonia and phosphate move through Gulf terminals that depend on steady drafts and berth availability. A week of low water at the mouth means a week of vessels waiting offshore or light loading. Importers pay demurrage, wholesalers pass it down. Retailers hedge by ordering earlier, filling inland warehouses in summer. That ties up cash. If the market turns, someone eats it. Farmers remember who had product and who didn't. Relationships shift. Export reputation is a quieter feedback. Buyers in North Africa or Southeast Asia don't care about our river physics. They care about arrival dates and vessel fullness. 2 seasons of partial loads and delays push them to write optional origin with a Brazilian bias. Basis along the Mississippi bakes in a penalty for reliability. Inland basis follows. That's not a crisis headline. That's a slow leak in national pricing power. The next low water year deepens the groove. Long-term acreage decisions keep score. If a farmer cuts corn acres 3 years in a row because spring nitrogen felt risky, the local elevator's corn flow dips. That elevator doesn't justify a dryer upgrade. The co-op trims staff. The seed dealer shifts inventory. Small towns notice it as just quieter. Meanwhile, resilience tools get deferred. Tile drainage install gets pushed. Variable rate upgrades wait. The agronomy meeting skips the soil biology talk and spends an hour on freight. Microstories sprout everywhere. A custom applicator adds a second tender truck to chase split applications, then can't find a driver. A young farmer loses a land bid to a larger operator who can absorb a bad river year. A terminal manager offers a small premium for early delivered beans to keep space, then closes fast. Each choice is rational. Together, they bend the arc of what gets planted, when it's fed, and how it exits. Unknown to them, across town, the water plants were doing their own math. School district calls ask if sodium advisories will hit cafeterias. Hospitals ask about dialysis thresholds. Utilities weigh whether to pre-order powdered activated carbon to handle taste complaints. Every bag on the loading dock is money that won't go to pipe rehab. Everyone is planning around the same river without speaking the same language. This was the moment everything changed, because farmers started planning to a river that might not show up. They book inputs earlier, diversify delivery points, and accept smaller, more frequent sales to manage basis risk. They sacrifice some potential yield to claw back control of timing. The food system feels it as flatter peaks, duller efficiency, and higher hidden costs. Unknown to them, across town, the water plants were doing their own math. Drinking water on a clock. From the utilities chair, the clock starts with a lab slip. Chloride nudges up. Sodium inches along. Operators huddle over SCADA screens, not because anything's broken, but because the river is trying to change what normal means while kids still need showers before school. Treatment plants aren't mystery boxes. Their chemistry on a schedule tied to thresholds. Taste around 250 ppm chloride, sensitive population sodium advisories even lower. Push past certain numbers and the schedule breaks you. Stakes first, corrosion doesn't wait for council meetings. Higher chlorides accelerate metal loss in pipes, valves, and meters. That can leach metals from legacy plumbing and chew through components that were supposed to last decades. Public health has its own tight lines. Sodium advisories for people on restricted diets, chloride thresholds for taste and corrosion, and disinfection byproducts that rise if operators chase taste with more organics removal at the wrong moment. Hospitals and dialysis centers live inside those lines. Schools do too. Action looks like triage. A plant manager calls her chem supplier and moves up a delivery of powdered activated carbon by a week. Another crew swaps out sacrificial anodes in a clear well to buy time against corrosion. Operators tweak the blend if they have it, mixing river water with groundwater from a backup well field to dilute chloride. The blending plan is on paper. The actual flow rates need hands-on valves and a phone call to the electric utility, because boosting a backup pump spikes the plant's demand charge. Everything connects. Meanwhile, the intake screens become the frontline. Crews lower logger arrays to track the density interface because the salt wedge rides low. If the interface lifts to the intake elevation, alarms won't announce it with a siren, taste complaints will. Plants with low set straws don't have many moves. Raise the intake if it's adjustable. If not, extend a temporary pipeline to a shallower reach or tie into a neighboring system across the parish line. Both options mean cash and time, and the Wedge doesn't care about procurement rules. Impact lands across town as contingency plans. Hospitals run drills. If sodium crosses preset thresholds, dialysis units switch to trucked-in water or premixed concentrate. School districts prepare pallets of bottled water and hydration stations because you can't serve salty tap to kids in PE. Nursing homes check blood pressure, meds twice. City halls draft advisories that balance clarity with calm. The phones at 311 hum with the same question. Is it safe to drink? Most days, yes. For everyone, that depends. Emergency pipelines are the fix you only build when the timer's already loud. Picture welding crews in the heat, fusing lengths of HDPE across a battera, tying a temporary line from a freshwater reach upstream to a plant that's out of options. Barges of potable water are the last resort after that, slow, expensive, finite, and were actively staged during the 2023 Intrusion. Every gallon barge to a treatment plant is a gallon not moving fertilizer or grain. The logistics stack onto themselves. Legal risk doesn't trend on social feeds, but it shapes decisions. Utilities carry liability for what leaves their taps. Salinity isn't regulated the way lead is, but corrosion that salinity accelerates can change water's chemistry and mobilize metals. If a plant pushes dose changes that nudge disinfection byproducts up, compliance snapshots can get ugly fast. Lawyers read those snapshots. Insurers do too. Unknown to them, across the levee, an industrial intake adjusts shifts. A refinery ramps down draws during high chloride windows, deferring processes that need low salt water. A chemical plant dials in a pretreatment step and eats the cost. Each plant's internal clock is linked to the same river meter as the city's, only the consequences show up in different balance sheets. They all watch the core, updates, and the parish lab bulletins like weather reports. Equipment fatigue becomes its own story. Treatment trains designed for steady raw water chemistry suffer when dosing swings more often. Valves cycle more. Membranes, where they exist, foul faster. Filters see more load. Capital plans move when emergency spending hits open purchase orders. A clarifier rehab slips a year because the plant burned cash on a temporary line and surge chemicals. That deferred project has a way of coming back during the next crisis, when you least want it. Then there's the human layer. Operators work 12-hour shifts threading needles between taste complaints and compliance. They get stopped in grocery aisles and asked to explain the wedge with a carton of eggs in their hand. Public works staff field call-ins from residents tasting coins or soap. It's not panic, it's fatigue. Trust erodes faster than a pipe when the faucet tastes off for a week. Health outcomes creep in. Sodium-sensitive residents increase bottled water use. Low-income households stretch budgets on jugs. Clinics see a few more headaches from dehydration because people avoid tap. None of it spikes a chart, all of it costs. Employers lose hours as workers queue for water handouts. The city buys another pallet, then another. Governance tries to catch up. Councils debate raising intakes, capital that takes years, permits and river windows. Some float desal hybrids or brackish RO skids as seasonal insurance. Engineers run numbers, kilowatts per 1,000 gallons, concentrate disposal, staff training. Redundancy looks expensive until you price the wedge as an annual visitor. Grants get written, deadlines slip. The river keeps its own calendar. This was the moment everything changed. The river turned from asset to adversary at the tap. Not a disaster with headlines, but a steady pressure that rewrites maintenance, budgets, and bedtimes. And while city crews chased a moving chemistry target, a different clock ticked at the mouth. Wind, tide, and a low river day aligning like teeth in a gear. The crisis scenario, when multiple systems fail together. Start with a Tuesday in late October. Harvest ran late after a wet September, so combines are finally moving hard. Upstream, the gauges are low, lower than last year, lower than planners wanted to see, because that early mountain snow already flushed through in August. Down at the Gulf, a strong south wind stacks water against the jetties. A tropical system skirts east, just close enough to send a pulse of surge. Three ordinary problems arrive together and start acting like one. Stakes first. If you're sitting in a wheelhouse above a shallow crossing, that wind-driven setup shaves what little draft you had left. If you're a plant operator, the surge presses salt farther up the bed right, as intakes are sipping closer to thresholds. If you're a farmer, your beans and corn are peaking for moisture and don't care about river physics. The clock you can't see runs the clocks you can. Action unfolds in layers. Pilots slow to one-way traffic through the worst bends, shaving convoys to keep keel clearance. Dispatchers build impromptu tide tables for the river, trying to hit tiny windows. Then the core chloride models shift, faster wedge advance, pushed by surge and a slack river. A call goes out, top the sill again. Dredges peel from crossings to stack sand onto the underwater berm. It's the right decision for drinking water. It costs you depth for navigation, where you need it most. Elevators along the lower river light-load ships to keep drafts within tighter limits. Demurrage clocks start. A few vessels get bumped from full berth to anchorage, waiting for better water. Shore crews juggle shifts to meet pilots at odd hours. One misstep and you ground a hull in mud you dredged last week. Insurance teams fire off memos, no night transits through certain crossings, added tugs for assists. Safety comes first, capacity comes second. Unknown to them, across town, The intake lab hits a chloride number that triggers the playbook. The utility announces a blending plan, and for sensitive populations, a sodium advisory. Hospitals switch dialysis protocols to a backup supply. Schools set out bottled water. Operators throttle a backup well field, and the electric bill spikes. A procurement officer signs an emergency order for carbon and corrosion inhibitors. The warehouse floor fills with pallets that weren't in the budget. Meanwhile, in the fields, the narrow harvest window slams shut for anyone dependent on a local shuttle linked to the river. Country elevators flash space limited on electronic boards. Basis widens by the hour. A farmer with grain at 15% moisture tries to deliver early to beat a forecast rain. The line wraps around the lot. Wet holding fills. The dryer can't catch up because propane trucks are late behind the same logistics knot. Every hour in line is yield shrinking and interest compounding. Impact compounds. Navigation restricts, so fertilizer vessels waiting offshore push their schedules back, bumping next week's berth into the week after. Importers pay demurrage, inland prices flinch. Co-ops hedge by pulling product by truck from an alternative terminal, paying more per ton and burning time. Spring plans shift in October because a late October river said so. The wedge presses, the sill holds, the channel thins. Each fix solves one problem and deepens another. Markets notice in the places that matter. Cash bids downriver gap from inland bids. Exporters with optional origin clauses flip to Brazil on a handful of cargoes. A few international buyers insert Gulf reliability language into tenders. It's quiet contractual gravity. Domestic futures barely twitch, but the real price, the one in a pickup seat, moves. SNAP budgets do spike today, but food inflation's tail gets a tug that'll show up at the grocery by winter. Security planners feel it in spreadsheets. Strategic fertilizer reserves move from a think piece to a talking point when ammonia deliveries slide a week into the wrong weather. Diesel stocks tighten because inland barges moved fewer gallons on more trips. A governor's staff calls the Corps, the port, the utilities, and the Ag department into one room. The question is plain: what can we prioritize without breaking something else? Then comes the detail you can't plan. A south wind lines up with a midday high tide and a stalled river. The Wedge jumps miles in a day. One parish flips from blending to temporary pipelines. Welders swing pipe across a batterer while a sheriff closes a levee road. Barges of potable water get staged as a last resort. The same tow company that can't move grain in one reach spends its day pushing freshwater in another. It's heroic and absurd at once. Unknown to them, across the state line, a lock on the upper river announces a mechanical outage. It's not catastrophic, it's a few days. But in this week, a few days at a gate means a few more tows stacked into a system with no slack. Railroads pick up some grain at premiums that erase margins. Trucks fill some gaps at a scale that can't match a 15-barge tow. Replacement fantasies meet physics and labor. International ripples form. A food aid tender delays because load dates get vague. A mill in North Africa trims inventory lower than comfortable and leans on Black Sea origin for a month. Freight indices in the Gulf creep. Insurance surcharges nudge. Analysts write bland notes about logistics headwinds. On the ground, Tanya still buys water, Lewis still loses a shift, Derek still burns peril at anchor, and Kelsey still watches basis blink red. Get this, the worst outcomes aren't inevitable if we face the lie. But first, the crisis has to be seen for what it is. Not a drought, not a storm, not a maintenance hiccup. It's a system tuned for efficiency, trying to live in a world that rewards resilience. The options, costs, trade-offs, timelines. If the lie was, the river is self-correcting, the truth is, we have to choose what to correct, and when. There are options, each one with a bill, a timeline, and something it breaks to fix something else. Start with the hardest, let the river build land again. Controlled diversions cut gates in levees to send sediment into dying wetlands, rebuilding the delta's natural baffles. Stakes are clear, more marsh slows surge and blunts the salt wedge. Action looks like opening structures during high sediment pulses, steering muddy water into basins we've starved for a century. Impact is slow by political standards and fast by geologic ones. Acres appear, habitat returns, surge loses teeth. The trade-off: every cubic yard building land is a cubic yard not deepening the ship channel that day. Navigation advocates see draft risk. Coastal parishes see a future. The timeline runs in decades. with visible wins in 5 to 10 if we commit. Second, retrofit the intakes, not the river. Raise straws, add redundancy, design seasonal bypasses. Stakes here are human taps that don't taste like coins in low water years. Action is tangible. Extend intake heads upstream to shallower layers, add blending wells or brachysharo skids sized for seasonal shocks, and loop neighboring systems with hardened interties. Impact is resilience at the faucet while the basin catches up. The trade-off is capital and power, higher electric bills, brine disposal headaches, and a rate case that has to explain to voters why it costs more to drink from the same river. Timelines are 3 to 7 years for major moves, faster for temporary lines that can be staged ahead of the next wedge. Third, manage sediment like an asset. We already dredge. Use the spoils to fight the problem that dredging worsened. Stakes are financial and physical turn maintenance into construction. Action is to programmatically place dredged sand on eroding headlands and barrier islands and to pre-build underwater sills where models show density intrusions recur. Impact is twofold: fewer emergency mobilizations, stronger coastal buffers. The trade-off is operational. Dredges spend hours placing, not just clearing, and the channel may cycle between deeper and shallower periods with more intent. Timelines are annual, budget a standing program, and you see benefits within seasons, compounding each year. Fourth, diversify logistics inland. If one spine is brittle, add ribs. Stakes run through farm incomes and national pricing power. Action means upgrading rail spurs to take unit trains at river towns, building intermodal grain terminals off the main stem, expanding storage at northern ports, and incentivizing seasonal routing to the Pacific Northwest or Great Lakes when Gulf drafts slip. Impact is reduced basis whiplash and fewer all legs in one river weeks. The trade-off is cost and coordination. Railroads want guaranteed volumes, farms want optionality, and public dollars must pick sites without playing favorites. Timelines vary. Some sightings become real within 2 years. Deep port expansions take 5 to 10. Fifth, accept seasonal navigation windows and plan reserves. Stake the calendar to the hydrograph we actually have. Action is to publish low-water playbooks, predictable draft reductions, prioritized commodities, and pre-arranged light-loading protocols. Pair that with strategic grain and fertilizer reserves, regional stocks sized to buffer a month of disruption. Impact is fewer panics and smoother curves in price. The trade-off is carrying cost, storage interest, spoilage risk, and political blowback for paying to wait. Timelines are administrative, 6 to 18 months to stand up, longer to normalize. Sixth, governance with teeth. The basin acts like one system, we govern it like a dozen. Stakes are everything else working. Action is a compact that aligns upstream releases, navigation maintenance, ecological targets, and salinity thresholds into one schedule. Think flood season rules for drought season. Impact is coordinated slack, a few hundred cubic feet per second released on the right day, a crossing dredged before it fails, a diversion opened when sediment peaks. The trade-off is sovereignty and habit. States surrender some discretion, agencies share dashboards and budgets. Timelines are political, years to ink, faster to pilot at sub-basin scale. Seventh, price reality into insurance and credit. Money steers behavior. Stakes are who survives the next low-water year. Action is to tie cheaper capital to resilience moves, better terms for fleets with shallow draft equipment, for terminals that add rail escape valves, for utilities that raise intakes. Impact is a portfolio that bends toward adaptation without a fight. The trade-off is that some legacy assets lose value faster. Timelines are immediate if lenders decide to move. Here's the part that's easy to miss. These aren't pick-one solutions. They interlock. Diversions blunt surge, raised intakes by time, sediment placement cuts emergency dredging, diversified logistics trims basis damage, a compact times all of it. The sequence matters. Quick wins first, intake adjustments where thresholds bite, standing sediment programs, published low-water playbooks, small iron rail sidings. Then medium moves, interties between water systems, shallow draft fleet upgrades, routine placement of dredge material into protective berms, targeted incentives for inland terminals. Then the heavy lifts, major diversions, large coastal builds, lock rehabs across aging 1930s-era infrastructure, a compact that survives an election. But here's the thing, fixes mean admitting what we denied for a century. The river won't be steady on command. That admission frees the budget from chasing the old normal and points it at a livable one. It asks exporters to accept light loading seasons and utilities to accept seasonal desal insurance. It asks farmers to accept more delivery points and fewer perfect windows. It asks all of us to pay a little every year to avoid paying a lot in one bad week. Costs will be quoted to the dollar. Benefits will arrive as quiet days, ships that load without headlines, faucets that don't taste like metal, harvests that clear without a week of panic. The timeline is the rest of our lives. The trade-off is between certainty we can't afford and resilience we can build. Who knew, who pays, who decides? Start with the files. Agency memos weren't shy, just quiet. Core studies flagged low-flow vulnerabilities and recurring salinity risks decades ago. Flow thresholds, chloride triggers, model runs with surges layered on subsidence. They're in appendices most people never read. State coastal plans mapped land loss and called for diversions, while navigation reports celebrated deeper drafts. Water utilities filed master plans that assumed historic baselines with footnotes about potential salinity excursions. The knowledge existed, it lived in silos. What nobody knew at the time, or didn't connect, was how those memos added up. A dredge plan in one binder and a salinity study in another aren't a conspiracy, they're a contradiction. Deepen the channel, you gain export efficiency and widen the path for density flow. Hold the levees tight, you save towns and starve wetlands that slowed surge. Guarantee 9 feet upstream, you hardwire a system whose life cycle costs begin to outpace maintenance dollars as the calendar flips and 44 of 59 locks age past 70 years. Everyone did their job, nobody owned the sum. So who pays? In a low-water year, taxpayers fund emergency sills, dredging surges, and bottled water staging. Utilities raise rates to cover chemicals, pipelines, and corrosion they didn't budget for. Farmers pay in basis and yield, pilots pay in idle payroll, port workers pay in shifts. Insurance pays until it prices out, and when insurers step back, finance steps back behind them. That's where the $50 trillion exposure lives, not as a single bill, but as risk repriced across agriculture, freight, industry, real estate, and municipal credit over decades. Get this, insurance has already started to move. Tow fleet C endorsements tighten for low-water operations. Industrial policies add salinity-related exclusions on equipment. Municipal carriers push utilities to document corrosion control and contingency supplies. Reinsurers quietly nudge models toward fatter tails. Cheaper premiums now come with strings, raise intakes, diversify logistics, demonstrate redundancies. Capital follows the strings. Finance reads the river in covenants. Banks roll operating lines to farms that can show multiple delivery points and on-farm storage. They hesitate on single-point river exposure. Term sheets for terminals sweeten if there's a rail escape valve. Bond markets ask utilities to prove salinity resilience before awarding an AA. Port authorities pitch dredging bonds and field questions about density flow and emergency sills. Credit committees aren't hydrologists, but they can spot volatility. Now the politics. The navigation lobby argues that deep channels and regular dredging keep American exports competitive. They're not wrong. Conservation groups push for diversions and sediment placement. They're not wrong either. Municipalities plead for higher intakes and interties. They're right about taps. Agriculture wants predictable freight at a price that leaves margin. Also true. The fight isn't facts versus fiction. It's timelines and priorities in a budget that can't do everything first. Inside the hearing rooms, language softens the stakes. Adaptive management, operational flexibility. Translate that, we're rationing attention and money. A port wants a cutoff of fees on light loading penalties. A parish wants grant dollars to move an intake. A coastal authority wants sediment guaranteed for land building. An upriver district wants lock rehabs pulled forward. Someone has to pick an order. Accountability slips through gaps. 6 states touch the lower main stem, fate, dozens influence flows. The Corps maintains channels and builds sills, but it doesn't set crop rotations or write city budgets. States hold water rights that don't mention density wedges. EPA regulates water quality metrics that aren't built for salinity arcs. No single office can say, on this date, we open this diversion, raise this intake, fund this rail spur, and dredge this crossing, without bumping a statute or a neighbor. Unknown to them, across town, communities are writing their own minutes. Parish councils demand public dashboards, gauge readings, chloride maps, sill status, dredge schedules, draft advisories. Fishermen ask how diversions will change their catch. Farm bureaus want low-water playbooks with dates and thresholds, not vibes. Barge pilots want standardized crossing priorities and night transit rules. Everyone wants to know what happens when gauges drop below a number that matters to them. Who decides? In theory, governors, the Corps, and Congress. In practice, bond markets, insurers, and mayors leaning over phones at 2 a.m. decide by saying yes to one invoice and no to another. If a compact is the goal, it needs teeth. A shared drought season rule curve, a sediment placement mandate, funded intake retrofits, and an agreed low-water operations code that locks in before the river drops. Not a wish list, an enforceable calendar. Here's the bill that matters: certainty versus resilience. Certainty says keep dredging deeper, trust averages, and pray for rain. Resilience says spend now to bend risk, raise straws, move sediment to where it slows salt, publish rules everyone can plan to, and build inland exits. The price tag is public. The penalty for delay shows up as quiet losses, basis pennies, insurance points, nights without water, and tides that push a wedge 1 mile farther each year. Communities can force the choice. Tie funding to metrics, demand cross-basin dashboards, vote for boards that price the river we have. The knowledge isn't missing anymore. The question is whether we use it. Aftermath and reckoning. In the weeks after the wedge retreated and the queues thinned, the paperwork started. Not press releases, audits, damage tallies, rate cases, lender memos. The Corps compiled an after-action report that read like a tide log: sill elevations by date, chloride curves by river mile, dredge hours by crossing, cost per cubic yard placed versus cleared. A port authority stapled on demurrage bills and light loading penalties, each a quiet tax for sailing on a thinner river. Utilities assembled a spreadsheet of chemicals burned, valves cycled, pump hours spiked, and a line titled Unplanned, Temporary Pipe, Bottled Water, Overtime. Hearings followed. In Baton Rouge, a joint committee packed with navigation, municipal, and coastal delegates stacked exhibits. A barge company laid out idle days against debt service, then pointed to a draft advisory timeline that turned red right as they cut toes. A parish engineer brought jars of tap water from the worst week, and a corrosion coupon pitted like a coin dragged on concrete. A coastal scientist showed time-lapse maps of land loss and sediment plumes taking the express lane to deep water. None of it contradicted, all of it collided. Reforms landed in pieces. The state fast-tracked intake raises for a handful of high-risk plants, temporary risers first, capital projects next. The Corps committed to a standing sediment placement program, codifying what had been improvisation: use maintenance dredge material to bulk up headlands and pre-place sills at repeat wedge pinch points. A low-water operations code, draft windows, crossing priorities, one-way restrictions, went from emailed advisories to a published matrix with thresholds everyone could see in spring instead of September. Deepening remained, but paired with mitigation and placement to reduce emergency cycles. Winners and losers sorted themselves quietly. Pilots with shallow draft boats got more calls, fleets heavy into deep draft assets shopped for partners or terms. Elevators with rail back doors captured flows when the river wobbled, those without promised upgrades or found new owners. Co-ops that held fertilizer early earned loyalty, those caught short saw customers drift. Utilities that had invested in blending wells used them. Others paid more to build temporary lines and promised voters they'd never do that again. Some operators exited. A family tow outfit sold to a national brand that could weather low utilization. A downriver grain house closed its river berth and kept only a truck scale, pointing producers north. A plastics plant paused an expansion until its intake could be lifted. Another moved forward after adding pretreatment to handle salinity spikes. Consolidation didn't arrive with fireworks. It showed up as fewer logos on barges and fewer buyers at the co-op meeting. The new normal took shape as a calendar, not a press conference. Seasonal navigation windows were treated like hunting seasons, posted in advance, enforced with less debate. Draft curves that once felt like emergency measures became standard operating procedure whenever gauges fell below a published line. Exporters programmed light loading periods into contracts. The Gulf remained the spine, but ribs thickened. More unit trains to the Pacific Northwest, more grain moving through lake ports in shoulder seasons, more country elevators with modest rail spurs that turned maybe into we can. Resilience started to carry a premium and a discount. Elevators offering reliable bids during low water got an extra penny. Tow companies with a shallow fleet shaved a basis penalty. Utilities with raised intakes earned better bond rates. The flip side, facilities pretending last decade's river was coming back paid higher insurance or watched their renewal letters thin. Quiet incentives nudged behavior faster than speeches. Culture shifted too. Parish meetings talked about coexistence design, how to get navigation, wetlands, and taps through the same week without betting the house on anyone. School field trips visited diversions as civic infrastructure, not science exhibits. Farmers folded river risk into rotation talks like whether, if they post the draft early, we haul beans to rail and plan corn acres lighter. Pilots swapped stories about timing windows and pre-placed sills like they were new aids to navigation. The word anomaly retired. Season took its seat. Meanwhile, a decade of missed warnings got closure. The 1988, 2012, 2022, and 2023 files were pulled from archives and taught as a sequence, not curiosities. The self-correcting river myth, told in brochures, budget hearings, and bond prospectuses, quietly left the room. In its place, a dashboard showing head differentials, sills status, intake elevations, and crossing health, viewable by anyone. That transparency didn't fix physics, it fixed planning. Wider meaning arrived in small scenes. A city council voted to fund an intertie to the neighboring parish, then actually opened it during a wedge. A port posted a schedule that paired dredge placements with ship windows, and captains planned without guessing. A farmer installed a small VRA upgrade and a second grain pit, not because it won trophies, but because it shaved a day off a bottleneck when basis went south. A tow company trained rookies on density interfaces with river-bottom sonar, turning a hidden layer into a known hazard. Everything wasn't solved. Locks still aged, storms still stacked water, snow still melted early, but the basin stopped pretending the river owed its steadiness. A compact took shape in draft form, pilot in one sub-basin, then two, tying drought season releases to salinity thresholds and sediment timing to dredge calendars. It wasn't perfect, it was a start. So what does it mean for you if you never touch the river? It means your grocery bill, your water bill, your mortgage rate on a house tied to a utility bond, your job at a plant that runs on river timing, all of it lives on a schedule the river writes. The reckoning wasn't punishment, it was admission. Once you admit, you can plan. That's the work of the next decade. Personal stakes and preparation. Let's bring this home. If your tap has never tasted like a coin and your pantry has always been full, you still live on this river's clock. Here's where things get interesting. Your first move is one call. Ask your utility three things: your intake elevation, your blending options, and the trigger numbers for advisories. If the person on the phone hesitates, that's your cue to press for the public dashboard your neighbors need. Household plans are boring until they are. Keep a 2-week water buffer, 1 gallon per person per day, plus extra for meds, infants, and pets. If sodium is a concern, choose low mineral bottled water and rotate it twice a year. Get a simple TDS meter and know it doesn't measure safety, just change. If numbers jump, check official updates before you panic. Store a camp filter for boil notices. It won't remove salt, but it buys time when lines stretch. Food costs will move in pulses. The river raises prices with delays, not drama. Hedge with habits. Build a pantry you actually eat. Staples you rotate, not apocalypse kits. Watch the crop calendar. Late, wet harvests downstream often mean higher grocery prices 60-120 days later. If you can buy in bulk during quiet months, you smooth the spikes that come with draft advisories you'll never read. Communities are resilience machines when they're tuned. Map trusted info sources now, your parish emergency page, the core sill updates, the port's draft board, the co-op's logistics texts. Make a simple call tree on paper for neighbors who won't scroll feeds. Churches, PTAs, and rec leagues become distribution networks in a day. Ask them where pallets would land, who has cold storage, who has a box truck and fuel. Small dollars go far early. Utilities need grant letters and rate case support to raise intakes and build into ties. Show up and say yes. Ports and co-ops need modest matches for sidings and storage. A chamber of commerce can organize businesses to bridge gaps. Farmers need predictable loadout hours when basis slips. A county board can nudge road weight rules for short windows that keep grain moving. Civic action matters upstream and down. Support basin governance with teeth. Drought season rule curves that balance releases with salinity thresholds, sediment placement mandates tied to maintenance dredging, and required public dashboards. Your representative won't feel the wedge on their tap. They'll feel your calls if you tie water bills and grocery bills to line items in a budget. Get this: personal resilience compounds. One household's water buffer shortens a distribution line. One apartment block with a group text catches a taste change before a clinic fills. One co-op with a spring fertilizer plan built on contingencies keeps acres in rotation and dollars local. That's how you turn a river's mood into a manageable season. One last thing before we go. The river you thought was permanent was always conditional, steady only when our choices matched its physics. If you want the next chapter on how shifting Arctic routes will rewire Gulf exports and inland risk, hit subscribe and watch the companion piece on the Great Lakes crisis. Then share this with someone who pays the water bill. The clock's running.